Hey, it's Dr. Don Russell here. I'm a psychotherapist, a trainer, and a professional speaker. I speak to people in my office in therapy and also to large groups about trauma and trauma recovery and building resilience. Today, in this video, I want to talk to you about mirror neurons, empathy, and how mirror neurons and empathy show up in therapy, and why it's important to hang out with people who make you feel good. That sounds like a really flaky statement, but I'm going to nail it by the time we're done in just a few minutes. To start with, hey, have you noticed that when you're sitting in a boring meeting and one person yawns, the yawn seems to be contagious. It just it goes around the room from one person to another. And man, oh man, is it ever difficult to not yawn when one person starts yawning. Same thing if you're walking down the street and somebody comes towards you and they smile at you. Guess what? Chances are you're going to smile back, whether you intended to or not. Now, that's just a mildly interesting phenomenon that you notice and usually just sort of move on with life. But I'm going to make it a little bit more complex. In the 1990s, a group of neuroscientists directed by Giacomo Rizzolotti from the University of Parma in Italy, discovered something surprising. They were studying brain activity in monkeys, essentially mapping what information is processed where in a monkey's brain. And on this day, the motor activity that they were studying was the reaching to grasp activity. So to ensure the monkeys did that motor activity of reaching out and grasping something, the researchers put some raisins out for the monkeys. And yeah, monkeys are smart. They reached out and they grasped for the raisins. And since the monkeys had electrodes on their skull, the researchers were able to identify what area of the brain was being activated or lit up when the monkeys made that activity. Mildly interesting. The researchers were not prepared for the real discovery that took place through this series of experiments. Here's what happened. They took a break to give both the researchers and the monkeys a break from the rigorous research. And they noticed that as the monkey was watching the researcher reach for raisins to put them away, the monkey's electrodes were still attached to the brain, and the monkey's brain lit up in exactly the same way as if the monkey, him or herself, was reaching for the raisins. A region of the monkey's brain was activated and firing both when it was doing the behavior or the activity, or when it was watching another do the same behavior or activity. That moves the whole research from mildly interesting to, oh my word, what's going on here? The neurons in this brain region are called mirror neurons, and they not only fire when we watch another do a behavior like yawning or smiling or reaching, but they also fire when we watch another person have an emotion. You can think of it as emotional contagion, as a process through which one person influences the emotions of another person and the emotional behavior of another person. When you stop to think about it, there's just numerous examples of this in daily life. Now, these mirror neurons are actually the neuroanatomical basis for empathy. I mean, obviously, psychologists knew for a long time that empathy was a thing, but this was actually putting a neuroanatomical underpinning underneath it. This is how it's happening inside the brain. And it's the mechanism for empathy. It's how one person can feel what another person is feeling. Now, this ability to feel what another person is feeling is the foundational element, one of the foundational elements of any good and effective therapy. See, it gives the client a sense that they are not alone, isolated in their experience, because the therapist's empathy, the therapist's mirror neurons can sense what the client is feeling and hopefully give back some feedback to the client that lets them know that they're not alone and isolated in their inner experience. Somebody else is feeling it too. That's hugely important, and like I say, it's one of the building blocks that makes any therapy an effective therapy. So this empathy works because the therapist can sense and use her mirror neurons to gauge and understand what the client is feeling. Now, mirror neurons work both ways, of course. Another and even more important contribution of mirror neurons and empathy comes when we think about how it flows in the other direction, when the client senses what the therapist is feeling. If the therapist is able to stay in a state of calm, warmth, and compassion while the client is describing that horrible experience that they experienced in the past, then the client can intuitively pick up this information and experience the memory in a slightly different way. And that is simply because the memory that the person is talking about is being witnessed by somebody who cares and somebody who's not overwhelmed by the experience. So the client is reliving this horrible experience, talking about it, and the therapist is able to stay connected to the story, but at the same time remain under control emotionally. And that information, I'm still under control emotionally, is automatically fed back to the client. And so the client learns something new about the experience that they're talking about. They learn that maybe this experience is a manageable experience because I'm telling somebody about it and they're not freaking out. Indeed, this is one of the other key foundational pieces of therapy. When a person remembers an event, it's being sort of pulled out of the memory archives, so to speak, not literally, pulled out of the memory archives and put into words, spoken to another person. The person's reaction, including their words, but also their expression, their tone of voice, and their body language, actually end up adding information to the experience. So the event becomes incrementally modified. So the memory now is made up of the original event in history plus the social emotional context in which it was remembered through the telling. By the way, this is the reason why two people who experience the very same event can have very different perceptions of the event down the road through time. Both of their memories have been massaged or incrementally changed over time by the telling of the story being added to by the social emotional context, how the person feels telling the story, and what vibes the person gets back from the person that they're telling the story to. So, because we have these mirror neurons in our brain, they give us the capacity to imagine what another person is feeling. And it suggests, as Dan Siegel says, that the self is not defined by the boundaries of the skin. I'm going to say that again. The self is not defined by the boundaries of the skin. We have both an internal embodied identity as me, right? I'm this guy that's sitting here and talking to you. And we also have an interpersonal, interconnected identity as we. I'm here and I'm talking and you're listening. Both me and we shape my sense of self. Both the me who I think I am and the we who I'm perceiving me to be also makes up who I am. I'll say that again. One ingredient that makes up who I believe myself to be is just who I feel myself to be when I look in the mirror. Another ingredient is the feedback that I get from other people. who they perceive me to be, and of course, who I perceive them perceiving me to be. So obviously, over the course of years, I've had lots of opportunities to get feedback about how people experience me. And fortunately, lots of the time people say, "Oh, Don, yeah, you're just a really, you seem to be like a warm and caring person and kind of unflappable," is some of the feedback I get over time. Well, you know what? I've embraced that feedback because I am interconnected with other human beings, and so that has become part of my identity. Fortunately, it's good and positive feedback. Of course, we also get other kinds of feedback, and we also perceive other kinds of feedback that is negative. When we hear negative and critical and judgmental messages about ourselves, or if we just perceive negative and critical and judgmental messages about ourselves, then those also are going to be absorbed, and they're going to contribute to make up the identity, the sense of self that I have. Now, I want to go on with another little piece from Dan Siegel. Dan Siegel has written, among other books, The Developing Mind and Mindsight. And in those books, he provides a definition of mind that is starting to become relevant for our discussion. I'll introduce the definition here, and in a next video, I'll explore some of the practical implications of his definition of mind. So his short definition of mind, so, that thing that's happening between my ears, is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So he's saying the mind is actually something that is happening within, actually not just between my ears, but through my whole body. My mind is an embodied process. And here's the kicker: the mind is a relational process. So my mind is not a static thing that exists and can be measured and a material thing. But my mind is a relational process. My mind is something that's happening between you and me. And my mind regulates the flow of energy and information between you and me, and between me and other people, and between you and other people. There's a lot to explore there, and so in my next video, I'll be exploring some of those implications for general life, and also some of those implications for trauma therapy and trauma recovery, because that's what this video series is all about. Thanks so much for listening to this video, and I hope it's helpful. And I would encourage you to subscribe to my video channel so that you are the first to hear when I release a new video. And by all means, give some comments, some suggestions for future videos, or some questions in the comment section below, and I would love to engage with those questions or comments.